Alright, brace for impact everyone, because this song is not for the faint of heart. Widely considered one of the greatest pop songs ever, Life on Mars is also one of Rick Wakeman's best contributions as a studio musician. Let's see what we can learn from this. This song is a freaking monster, and I wanna do it justice, so I'm gonna split this tutorial up into two parts. In this video I'll go through the verse and the pre-chorus, and then the next one will cover the chorus and the interlude. So let's start with the verse. It consists of an 8-bar phrase that's played twice. The key is F major, and here's the chord progression. We start on the tonic chord F, then we got A minor over E, followed by A diminished over E flat, and then D with some extra moves that we'll look at in a minute. Then we got G minor, B flat over F, and finally C7 for bars 7 and 8. Quick sidebar, the pulse of the song is about here. But if I notated it like that, the sheet music would contain a bunch of 30-second notes and 30-second note triplets, which would make it a real pain in the ass to read. So I've written it in cut time at twice the BPM to make it easier. Okay, so in order to understand what's happening here harmonically, let's reverse engineer this progression. It starts with the tonic chord in bar 1, which is the most expected thing in the world. Now let's skip the next few bars for a moment and go to bar 5. There we find a G minor chord, which is a diatonic 2 chord in the key of F, and that's also a very common chord. So at this point we have a harmonic journey that starts on the tonic chord, stays there for quite a while, and then finally moves to the 2 minor chord. It sounds like this. Not the most exciting chord progression I've ever heard, and apparently that's what they were thinking, because they put a whole bunch of chords in between the F and the G minor. For starters, there's a D chord in bar 4, which is the 5 chord of G minor. We call this a secondary dominant, right? The 5 chord of a diatonic chord other than the 1 chord. So we got a D chord, but that's not all. He starts on D sus4. Then on beat 3 he resolves the suspension to a D major triad, and then on beat 4 he adds the 7th and puts the 3rd in the bass. All this complexity in what is essentially just a bar of D. So now in bars 2 and 3 he uses a technique called a line cliché. What's a line cliché? It's a way to decorate a static chord by moving one voice up or down while keeping the other voices the same. Here's an example you've heard. What makes this hip is the chromatic movement in the left hand, right? Without that, it would sound like this. Nah. So in the verse, that's what they're doing. They're starting with an F major chord, and then they move the root down chromatically. The chords created by this are A minor over E and A diminished over E flat. And with that, they've turned what could just be 4 bars of F into this. Okay, so we've arrived at the G minor chord in bar 5. What's next? In bar 6, he plays B flat over F, or we could call it G minor 7 over F, because he does play a G in this bar as well. And that is a transitional chord that strongly suggests a resolution to the 5 chord, C or C7, and that is exactly what we're getting in the last 2 bars of the 8-bar phrase. Essentially, it's a 2-5 progression leading us back to the tonic chord F. Okay, we got the chords of the verse now. So how does Rick express that progression in his actual piano part? Masterfully, of course, because he's a badass. Rick's playing here is a masterclass on how not to play this. Two of the most prominent features of his piano part are arpeggios and incorporating melodies into the accompaniment. In the first 3 bars, he plays this little melody on top. And listen to how cool that sounds against the line cliché in the bass. And then in the middle, he arpeggiates the chords, and the exact rhythm and order of the notes are different in each bar. And then in bar 4, he goes into overdrive. Both the rhythmic and the harmonic movement are more complex than in the previous bars. Here's bar 4. And here are the first 4 bars together. Okay, the next few bars contain some more interesting arpeggiation, and he also reinforces some of the notes with dyads. Here's bar 5, bar 6, and then we get to C7 for bar 7 and 8 of the verse. Once again, notice the flurry of 16th notes at the end of the 4-bar phrase. This is the pianistic equivalent of a drum fill setting up the next section. Okay, that was the first half of the verse. The second half repeats the same chord progression, and Rick's general approach is similar, but the exact notes are different. Because that's just how he rolls. No lazy repetition here. I'm looking at you, 21st century pop music. Here's bar 9, where he plays another little melody. Then bar 10 is pretty simple. On the A diminished chord in bar 11, we get a little callback to the melody he played at the top of the song. Compare that to the A diminished bar in the first half of the verse. It's similar but different. Then in bar 12 we get another piece of trickery around a D chord. Here's bar 13. Bar 14, and in bar 15 he plays a really prominent D on beat 1, which kinda turns the C chord into a C9. And then in bar 16 he retreats to a simple C major triad. So there's 2 verses in this song, right? And each verse consists of 2 harmonically identical 8-bar phrases. So we got 4 of these phrases in total, and each iteration is similar to, but also different from, the other 3. One of the best ways to really understand what he's doing is to compare the 4 different versions and pay attention to how he expresses the same ideas in 4 different ways. For example, let's look at bar 4 of each 8-bar phrase in turn. Here's the first one, the second one, here's number 3, and the last one. It's an endlessly inventive arpeggio masterclass. Okay, I'm not gonna go through the entire second verse, but I've transcribed it if you wanna check it out. Link to the sheet music in the description. Alright, if you thought the verse was tricky, wait till you get a load of the pre-chorus. That shit is bonkers, harmonically speaking. Let's see if we can make sense of this. Here's the chord progression. It starts on C minor over E flat, and on beat 4 he switches to A flat over E flat. Now the official sheet music says A flat over E flat for the whole bar, and that is what he plays in the second pre-chorus, but in the first one he definitely plays C minor at the beginning of the bar, and then switches to A flat at the end. It kind of feels like maybe he played the C minor chord and then remembered, oh shit, I was supposed to play A flat, and then switched. And before you start yelling at me, Christian, how dare you suggest that Rick Wakeman made a mistake? Rick Wakeman is a genius musician, but he's also human, and I don't know if you've noticed, humans make mistakes, okay? Alright, in bar 2 of the pre-chorus we have E augmented, followed by F minor, and then G flat sus2. The second half starts on D flat major, then we got A augmented and B flat minor. And then in the last bar of the pre-chorus, we get a mystery chord that we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so how do we explain all this harmonic weirdness? There's different ways of looking at it. Obviously, we don't stay in the key of F major that the verse was in. We're modulating, right? One interpretation is something called chromatic medians. The word median refers to a third relationship. The diatonic medians from F would be A and D. This is called the submedian, meaning the median below the tonic. Now, the notes A flat and D flat would be chromatic medians relative to F. So, getting back to our pre-chorus, we could look at the first 4 bars as being in A flat and the second 4 bars as being in D flat. So, the song starts in F, then modulates to a chromatic median key above, and then to a chromatic median key below. Here's another way to look at this, and that's going back to the idea of line clichés I mentioned earlier. Generally, with line clichés, we got 4 different options. We can start with a major triad and move the 5th up chromatically, either 1 or 2 or 3 steps. Or we can move the root down chromatically. Or we can do the same thing with a minor triad. Move the 5th up. Or move the root down. Sometimes these stepwise movements happen in the bass as well, and sometimes they don't. So we could play this last one like this. Or like this. So here in the pre-chorus, if we start with an A-flat major triad and then move the E-flat up chromatically, we get this. And that's basically what's happening here, except for 2 extra details. At the very beginning he plays C minor and then goes to the A-flat. So there's another chromatic step from the G to the A-flat. And then in bar 4, instead of just moving the F to G-flat, he also moves the C to D-flat. So that's 2 steps on the last harmonic move. Meanwhile, the bass line reinforces all this by starting on the E-flat and moving up in half steps. Sometimes the best way to understand harmony is not to analyze the individual vertical chord structures and assign them a traditional harmonic function, but instead to look at the horizontal movement of voices from one chord to the next. And I think that's the case here. Okay, in the second half of the pre-chorus we get a very similar thing. It starts on a D-flat triad and then the 5th moves up chromatically. And the bass in this case starts on the root of the first chord D-flat and then jumps to the chromatic line. Alright, now we get to that infamous last chord of the pre-chorus. Everybody gets this wrong, and I mean everybody, including the official sheet music people. So here's what the sheet music says: D-flat 7 over C-flat. Now that's one of the better opinions out there, but it's not correct. The first problem is the A-flat, which Rick clearly doesn't play. If we leave it out, we're left with this. All these notes are in the chord, but there's one missing, and it's this one. There's a G-flat in the chord, which totally changes the harmonic implication. See, everyone assumes that it's basically a D-flat chord and then you put the flat 7 in the bass. I disagree. I think it's even sneakier than that. It's basically a C-flat chord. Then he goes sus2, so 2 instead of 3. And then he adds a sharp 4. So yes, the top part kinda looks like D-flat 7. But that sits on a foundation of a C-flat power chord, which makes it not a D-flat chord at all. All this line cliché action creates an emotional effect of climbing upwards towards a destination, which of course is the purpose of a pre-chorus, to lead us into the chorus in a convincing and interesting way. Now let's look at the actual piano part. It retains some of the characteristics of the verse, but it's a bit bigger and busier. Here's bar 1. And again, he starts on C minor and then switches to A flat on beat 4, while in the second pre-chorus he's on A flat right away. And we also get a 16th note fill at the end of the bar again. Here's the E augmented in bar 2. Then on the F minor in bar 3, he uses a little 3-2-1 melody like he did on the F major chord earlier. In bar 4, we got the G flat sus4, which acts as a kind of pivot chord that sets up the modulation to the key of D flat in bar 5. Those are some crazy arpeggio gymnastics right there. Then we got A augmented in bar 6, B flat minor in bar 7, and that weird C flat chord in bar 8 with some awesome triplets leading into the chorus. There's also a little ritardando leading into the chorus. Alright, that's it for part 1 of this tutorial. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll look at the other 2 sections, the chorus and the guitar solo. Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.